This video is about properties of rhombuses, rectangles, and squares. A rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. Now, if you look at a shape like this, most people would call it a diamond, okay? But the true mathematical, the geometric name for it is a rhombus, okay? Because the 4 sides are the same length. Okay. Now there are some properties that you need to know about rhombuses. First of all, a rhombus is a quadrilateral, and so it has 4 sides, and the sum of the interior angles is 360. Okay. A rhombus is also a parallelogram, so it has all the properties of parallelograms. The opposite sides are congruent, the consecutive angles are supplementary, the opposite angles are congruent, and the diagonals will bisect each other. Okay, everything that's true about a parallelogram will also be true of a rhombus because a rhombus is a parallelogram. Okay, and there are also some more. To introduce this to you, here's the Geometry Sketchpad file, and I've constructed here a rhombus. Okay, and let me draw in the diagonals because the interesting things happen with the diagonals. Okay, here are the diagonals. Now you may notice that the diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, and that is the next property. And the other thing to notice is about the angles. Now this is a lot of angles to look at, okay? But you'll notice that these angles are the same, and these angles are the same, and these angles are the same, and these angles are the same, okay? Or in other words, the diagonals will bisect the angles. In other words, this diagonal will bisect this angle and this angle. And this diagonal will bisect this angle and this angle. Okay? The diagonals will bisect the angles. Okay, those are the 2 properties of rhombuses. Okay, the first one is that if a parallelogram is a rhombus, then its diagonals are perpendicular. The second one is if a parallelogram is a rhombus, then each diagonal bisects a pair of opposite angles. Now I'm going to use those properties to find some missing angles. I know that this angle is 106, and I need to find angles 1, 2, and 3. Now I'll first go back to the fact that a rhombus is a parallelogram, which means that 106 and this big angle must be supplementary. So 180 minus 106 is equal to 74. Okay, now using the fact that a rhombus, that the diagonal in a rhombus will bisect the opposite angles, I know that angles 1 and 2 must be the same. So 74 divided by 2 is equal to 37. So angles 1 and 2 are 37. Okay? For the exact same reason, this big angle is also 74. And for the exact same reason, angles 3 and 4 are also 37. Okay? Notice that these angles will be the same in a rhombus because it bisects congruent angles, and so these parts, angles 1 and 3, will also be congruent. Okay? Let's go over here to number 2. Okay, the first thing I notice is that the diagonals are perpendicular, so angle 2 must be 90. Okay, I also, like we just talked about, this diagonal will bisect opposite angles, and angle 3 will also be 58. Okay, now to find angles 3 and 4, it'll take a little bit more work. This is also 58 and 90. Okay, so angle 1 will be the angle it needs to be so that these 3 angles will make 180 because it forms a triangle. So 90 plus 58 is 148. So to find angle 1, I take 180 minus 148, and I get 32. Okay, and angle 4 is also 32 because that angle has been bisected. Okay, a rectangle. A rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. So a rectangle is a quadrilateral, so it has 4 sides. The sum of the angles is 360. It's also a parallelogram, so the opposite sides are congruent, and the consecutive angles are supplementary, and the opposite angles are congruent, and the diagonals will bisect each other. And let me point out that a rectangle is not a rhombus, so it won't have the properties of a rhombus, but it does have one more property that's pretty important. So here's a Geometry Sketchpad file. Here's a rectangle that I've constructed. Okay, and I will draw in the diagonals and measure them. Okay, hopefully you notice that the diagonals are always the same length. And that's the property. Okay, if a parallelogram is a rectangle, then its diagonals are congruent. Okay, it's really important idea about blah. Now let's use that idea to find the value of x. Now let me kind of draw the picture so I can see it. L, M, and P in order. Ln is 5x minus 8. MP is 2x plus 1. Now I just learned that the diagonals are congruent. So 5x minus 8 is equal to 2x plus 1. And I will subtract 2x from both sides. And 3x minus 8 is equal to 1. So I add 8 to both sides. 3x is equal to 9. Divide both sides by 3. And x is equal to 3. Okay? Now let's move on to squares. A square is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. Okay, which means that a square is a rhombus and it's a rectangle. So it'll have all the properties of quadrilaterals and of parallelograms and of rhombuses and of rectangles. So there are 4 sides. The sum of the interior angles is 360. The opposite sides are congruent. The consecutive angles are supplementary. Opposite angles are congruent. Diagonals bisect each other. A square is a rhombus, and so the diagonals are perpendicular, and the diagonals will bisect a pair of opposite angles. It's also a rectangle, so the diagonals are congruent. Okay, there's a lot there. Put in your notes what you want in your notes. Okay, there's a lot of properties of squares. Okay, find the values of the variables, then find the side lengths. So I know that in a square, all the sides are the same length. So I'm going to use some algebra and say, well, these both have y in them and they're congruent. So I know that y minus 1 is equal to 2y minus 5. So I'll subtract y from both sides. And y is equal to 4. So find the variables. Okay, so y is 4, and so y minus 1 must be 3. This is also 3. Okay, and so this length must also be equal to 3, because all the sides are the same. So 3 is equal to 2x minus 7. I'll add 7 to both sides. And 10 is equal to 2x. Divide both sides by 2. X is equal to 5. Okay, again, the jump to this equation comes from the fact that in a square, all the sides are the same length, and so they're all equal to 3. Okay, is each parallelogram a rhombus, rectangle, or square? Explain. Okay, they're all parallelograms. Okay, so all the opposite sides will be congruent. This is the same as this, and this is the same as this. Okay, the consecutive angles are supplementary. So if this is 90, this is 90, and this is 90, and this is 90. So this is a square. Okay, number 2, all the sides are the same length, but this is not 90, so it's not a rectangle, and it must be a rhombus. Okay, number 3 down here, these are parallel, okay, and these are the same, but it's different than the other ones, and so it can't be a rhombus, and I don't know if these angles are 90 degrees, so it can't be a rectangle or a square, and so it's just a parallelogram. Okay, last one. It's a parallelogram. I have 4 right angles, so it must be a rectangle. Okay, this video was about properties of rhombuses, rectangles, and squares.